This is episode 1 with my guest, Danielle Belgrave. She is currently a principal research manager at Microsoft Research in the UK, doing machine learning research in healthcare. Danielle holds a PhD in statistics and machine learning from the University of Manchester, a master's degree in statistics from the University College London, and a bachelor's degree in business mathematics and statistics from London School of Economics. Professionally, she's done research as a postdoc at the University of Manchester, been a principal statistician at GlaxoSmithKline, a global pharmaceutical company, was a research fellow in biomedical modeling at Imperial College London. In this episode, we learn about Danielle's journey from the Caribbean to the UK, understand where she got her drive and passion for doing advanced machine learning research in healthcare, and learn from her experiences as a black woman becoming successful in the UK. A great anecdote, Danielle's PhD advisor, Christopher Bishop, is a world-renowned machine learning researcher who wrote one of the most read books in machine learning called Pattern Recognition and Machine Learning. This means she has received a PhD from one of the top people in machine learning. I hope you enjoy learning from her journey and find inspiration to chart your own path in machine learning and tech. Let's go.
The show where we talk about data science in the Caribbean, highlighting practical ways that you can learn, get involved, and create your own impact using artificial intelligence and machine learning. This is the Caribbean Data Science Podcast with Mark Moyu and Jeff Sayon.
Hi, Danielle. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for having me here.
Fantastic. So we're just talking a bit more about how we can get people from the Caribbean diaspora to pursue careers in tech, more specifically machine learning, which is your field as well. So looking forward to hearing your perspectives there.
Great.
Let's start with giving us a bit more flavor of what you're working on now and where you're originally from.
Right. So I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, the sunny Caribbean. And right now I'm working in machine learning for healthcare. So I've been working in machine learning for healthcare for the past 10 years. My sort of path is very much into research, and the main focus of my work is using machine learning, specifically a technique called probabilistic graphical modeling, to understand disease heterogeneity. And the underlying motivation for this sort of problem is, why do some people respond to treatments and why do some people not respond to treatment? So using machine learning, what we try to do is understand this heterogeneity in response in order to see whether we can identify different subgroups of disease, and based on those subgroups, develop different sort of predictive models for using machine learning to see whether we can get more targeted interventions as well. So in a nutshell, that's what I do. For about 8 years, I focused on asthma and allergic disease. One thing I'm super passionate about is mental health. And for the past 3.5 years, I've been working in Microsoft Research, looking at how we can use machine learning to help enhance engagement and personalized therapies in a digital mental health platform. And we think mental health is a huge burden on society. 1 in 4 of us at some point in our lives would be affected by some mental health condition, whether it's depression, anxiety. These are the most common themes in mental health. And I think one thing that drew me to mental health as well is also how stigmatized it is in the Caribbean as well. And I think with digital interventions and using machine learning, we have the power to really scale the sorts of interventions we can personalize as well. So that's something that I've been working on for the past 3 years now.
All right, fantastic. And that's a long sort of journey when it comes to just doing healthcare and machine learning, and extremely noble effort. So we're going to dig into that some more coming up. So before we really jump in, a question I'd like to ask everyone on the call is, what's your interpretation of AI versus ML and data science? And the specific reason for asking is, I think it helps to frame how you approach your work on a daily basis.
Yes, I think this is a really interesting question. I would say that particularly working in an applied domain, what you're interested in is solving problems. So sometimes the tools you need to solve those problems are more heuristic and statistical, and sometimes the tools you need are more hypothesis generating. So sometimes we have a model of how the world works. So you want to do a hypothesis test. So typical scientific validation, you develop a hypothesis, and then you see whether there's statistical evidence for that. In other scenarios, we'd want to use more hypothesis generating, especially in the field of big data. So there we'd probably use more machine learning techniques where we're using more data-driven approaches to generate hypotheses and see then whether we can have some way of validating that using data science techniques. I think the lines are very blurry. There's a lot of intersection between ML, data science, and AI. I would sort of, if I was to force to sort of categorize things, I would say that artificial intelligence is probably more in the intersection of how do we take things from insights, so those machine learning and data science insights, into something that's actionable. So something that's more functional as a standalone piece. I think this is a bit of an artificial interpretation because also within the field of machine learning, there's so much scope, but I always think of AI as the part where we make data science and machine learning more implementable and changing research insights to implementable, actionable insights.
All right. So it gets very interesting as you go across the different calls and the different folks that we interview, how that definition changes. So
Yeah.
It's important to align on it when we start talking, right?
Yes.
Let's start with what motivated you to get into machine learning, AI, data science, and can you give us a highlight journey from high school up until now?
Yeah, so I must say throughout primary school, math was something that I was always really keen on. But for me, a pivotal moment was where there was a point in time when I was not doing so well in mathematics in secondary school. So I think for me, the transition from primary to secondary school was quite tough because maybe the teaching techniques, the teaching styles are very different. And when I was 15 and sort of doing really badly at math and wanted to add math, I met a teacher called Mr. Wallace. So I used to go to lessons with Mr. Wallace, and he was the most brilliant math teacher I've ever had. There were lots of us in that class from different schools and different perspectives. And that for me was just a turning point in how I engaged with mathematics as well. And I also like to talk about my journey in terms of the failures, but also in terms of the successes. And I think this is a bit to encourage people not to give up. Sometimes you just need you just need to find that one person who inspires you and encourages you. And I think it works both ways. One is trying to find those people, but also I think from a teacher's perspective, not to give up on students as well. So Mr. Wallace used to show me advertisements in the Royal Statistical Society magazine for medical statisticians. And he said, this is what you have to be. And one thing I liked about Mr. Wallace as a teacher is this is how he was with all of his students. If you talk to any of his students, he was also interested in what they would be later on. And he got to know them very well and gave very good career advice. So this was, I think, seeing, the advertisements, medical statisticians and the sort of pay that they got, I thought, yes, okay, this is what I want. And I mean, now I'm not a medical statistician. I've pivoted. I would still say I do medical statistics. So from Mr. Wallace's lessons class on Woodford Street, I went to London School of Economics. So I did business, mathematics, and statistics there, which was a very interesting experience because I got exemptions for actuarial science, but always with the knowledge that this wasn't my world. What I wanted to do was to work in healthcare, but I think I went to LSE because of the branding, and it was a good school. And it was really interesting. And now it's even interesting seeing the difference between my friends who've gone to LSE and are working in investment banks and as accountants, and the diversity of different jobs they have, mostly in finance. And I went on to do a master's in UCL and was focusing on medical stats, but in statistics. From there, so I started my PhD in 2010. From there, and I think one of the things that happened around 2009, 2010 was the explosion of data. So there were two revolutions that happened side by side. I would say in 2009, it was very much at the beginning of the computational revolution, maybe 2006, where you got an increase in computational power. And also there was an explosion of the amount of data that was available. So suddenly there were all of the Google searches. There's just so much data you can get very readily accessible on a day-to-day basis with mobile phones, with different things that we use. So this was a period where I realized that statistical techniques weren't enough for solving big data problems. They reach a limitation where you can do the hypothesis testing, but where you have big data, you need to do discovery. So there was also an explosion of genomic data. You think human genome was sequenced in what, the year 2000? And suddenly in 2010, that technology got a lot cheaper. Now it's even cheaper. I think you can get genome sequenced for about $10, maybe, 100 TT, maybe. So technology has gotten a lot cheaper. So the amount of data you can get about a person becomes exponential. And with this panorama, I started looking at machine learning for healthcare. So a main focus of my PhD was what are the limitations of statistics and where can we use machine learning to solve some of these problems? So as I was mentioning in our conversation earlier, a lot of the work I did was in probabilistic graphical modeling. So looking to see whether we can uncover patterns in that data and identify different subgroups of people. So that for me was sort of the highlight of my academic journey. And so since I've moved between academia and industry as well. So after doing my PhD at the University of Manchester, I went on to do a postdoc there and then decided to go to pharma. And this was an interesting pivot where I did become a medical statistician officially. I worked for GlaxoSmithKline, so that was the dream fulfilled. Nice. And that was a super interesting experience to move from a research setting to another research setting, but where you're looking at real world data. So real world, how does a drug work in an individual, and how can you use machine learning there as well? From there, I went back to academia as a tenured faculty position in Imperial College. And then I went to work for Microsoft. So my PhD was actually funded by Microsoft. So I'd been collaborating with them for about 10 years before me finally signing my life away and saying, hey, I want to work for Microsoft. So I joined Microsoft at a really interesting time, I would say, where for me, it was evidence that if you want to have an impact in healthcare, you need to do it in the tech space. Academia is great for discovery, but once you're in a cycle of so one of the things about academia is you're measured by how much you publish, which is great because I think it's good that we have open science and that we sort of we contribute to that openness in machine learning and saying how do we get to certain conclusions. What I wanted to do in the tech space is see how can we have real world impact. So this is something that motivates me. And yeah, anyway, that's the journey to how I got here now.
Microsoft. Wow.
Go for it.
Fantastic. So we're back at Microsoft. And I think as you went from high school all the way up into Microsoft, you came from Trinidad, ended up in the UK. Let's maybe start there. Why the UK versus the US? That's an important decision for a lot of people leaving high school. What were your thoughts there?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. So I was lucky enough to be able to choose between that. So when I was 16, I had family both in the US and the UK. So after GCSEs, I went to spend some time with my family in the US and the UK to see what was the cultural fit. And I think for me, the UK was a much better cultural fit than the US. I think that's a personal choice, but I'm also fortunate that I could make that choice. I do think for people in the Caribbean, sometimes the US is a lot more appealing. It's closer as well, but it's a different culture, and I think there are advantages to both cultures. One thing I love about the American culture is it being very entrepreneur. Like there's a very can-do attitude, and I think that's great. The UK is a lot more pragmatic, I think, and this was one of the things that appealed to me as well. So, for example, my degree was 3 years. My PhD was 3 years as well. So this this is, and I think it's also because there's a strong focus on practice as well. Maybe that has slight disadvantages. So in the US, the degree and the PhD is much longer as a program. So you may get into a lot more depth. In the UK, the concept is that you get into depth on the job. So I started working when I was very young. I started working at 21. That's my first job straight after my master's. But sometimes there's a big disconnect between what you learn in theory in a mathematical degree to actually working in practice. So that practice is a big focus in the UK, but that's sort of my perception. I think it's personal preference.
I definitely admire that preference. I in my own journey coming to the US, well, first of all, it was the weather. I'm just like, it's way too cold. I couldn't deal with that. And being close to the beach, island, whatever. But one of the things that you mentioned there in terms of the length of degrees, and that is a really tough thing in the US. Took me the standard 4 to 5, right? And that's a lot of time. Whereas you can compress a lot of that in the UK. You have really good brand names when it comes to some of the schools that you went to as well. And that's cool. So did you always know you wanted to get into healthcare? That's one thing that wasn't very clear.
But since I was 16, yes. So just since seeing those advertisements of medical statisticians, yeah, that has been my focus since. But I don't know. I think this sort of linear trajectory is very unusual. I don't know whether actually, if I think of a lot of my friends from Trinidad and from school, I would say that a lot of them were quite linear as well, where at the age of 15, you're making decisions about what you want to do in the future and you project. I think that this has a huge advantage because from a very young age, we're encouraged to think, what do we want to be when we grow up? And there are these conversations of this determines what you're going to study at GCSEs, it determines what you're going to do at A levels, and it determines also what schools you want to go to and what degree you're going to do. This is something that I don't see so much in the UK, for example. I think maybe there's a lot more scope to pivot. So you see a lot of more people pivoting between careers and between disciplines as well. I think there's no path that's better than the other. But for me, I'm really appreciative that quite early on in school, my teachers always asked me, well, what do you want to do? And you're always taught to plan ahead. And I think this has been a huge advantage for me personally.
And that's a really impactful story because I'm almost like the opposite in terms of I had no clue what the heck I wanted to do. And so I really admire folks that knew what they wanted to do and went after it and sort of went the entire way. And your career is a true testament to that. Can you speak to the change in your attitude from high school? It seems like you're a very disciplined student. How did that sort of transition as you got into your PhD? That's a whole extra level of discipline. And, you mentioned some mental health there. We've both gone through that experience. And how did you overcome some of those stressing times, I would say?
All right, so I guess now is the moment of truth. So I would say actually in school, I was not that disciplined. I wish I was more disciplined. This made things a bit harder going through university and then with my PhD. But I think that everyone has their moment to peak. So I think my moment to peak was
Hmm.
probably from my PhD onwards. And I think I say this as well, with that underlying, don't give up on yourself as well, and don't give up on your dreams and ambitions. I think that one thing I did have, even though maybe I wasn't super disciplined, in school, there were some things that I really enjoyed at school, but some things that I didn't enjoy so much. So maybe I settled down in A levels where I did really well. I did better in my A levels than my GCSEs, for example. And I think that has a lot to do with focusing a bit more on the aspects of schoolwork that you like, that you can make this choice. So for A levels, I did math, further math and physics. And I excelled at that because that is what I liked doing. I also like French and Spanish, but it was hard to find that combination of French, Spanish, and the sciences. So unfortunately, I think it's changed now where people can do more things. But I think one thing that with my PhD and with like after maybe from my master's onwards was sometimes I think my sort of strong motto is sometimes a lack of talent you can make up for with hard work. So I love focusing on problems, giving myself timelines. I think that organization is really important to be self-organized and don't depend on someone else to organize your time for you. So set yourself your challenges. Remember with my PhD, it was 6 months before my PhD, and I asked my advisor, "Do you think I can finish in 3 years?" Because I was like, I need to get out in 3 years. I need to get a job. And he said, "No way." And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this. I cannot take this PhD for one day over 3 years. And I think that requires you to sit down, give yourself tough challenges, and also make decisions around doing what you can, so maximizing what you can do in the time that you have. So time is a treasure. Time is super short. But one of my advisors had this expression that the perfect is the enemy of the what's good enough. And sometimes, in order to get things moving forward, you have to make compromises. You do a good job still, but you do what's good in that time and set yourself challenges there.
All right. I wish I had you while I was in school to kind of keep hitting me with that whip over the head. And I wanted to highlight one of the points that you made, right? I think if anyone looked at me in high school and said, "Oh, Mark would do a PhD," they'd be like, "Yeah, that's impossible." And I would have agreed with them. I was just way too slack of a student. And it really comes down to hard work. I don't think the smartest people finish PhDs. The hardest working ones end up, writing that long document. And one of the things I wanted to raise again is you've mentioned the impact of mentors in your life and how they've been sort of crucial to molding sort of your own mind, what's possible. And can you maybe speak to how important is your advisor when you choose to do an advanced degree?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and I wish that I knew the importance of mentors when I was younger. But I think a lot of the contribution to my own success was having I have had fantastic mentors. But also, I think this doesn't necessarily mean that fantastic mentors drop out of the air. I think sometimes you need to foster these relationships as well. So I remember I had a mentor who it was really hard to engage with. So I had to spend a lot of time focusing on how can we get a good working relationship together. So I think that sometimes good mentors drop out of the sky. So I think my teacher, Mr. Wallace, was fantastic. He was a brilliant teacher with everybody. But I think sometimes the sort of sometimes you're not in a position where you can choose your mentors. So you do have to spend times fostering that interaction as well and seeing how can you adapt your working style to this person to maximize from that. And some of the most fruitful mentorship relationships I've had have been like that. But I having seen this, I have realized the value of having a really good mentor. So this also depends on what you value as well. So for me, having a mentor with really good technical competency is super important. And they're different mentoring styles and different types of mentors. So maybe when I was younger, I couldn't necessarily choose who I'd have as a mentor, but maybe I got lucky. But maybe if I did that process again, I would look at this. I would say that one thing I did try to do, especially going into the PhD, was try to get to know my mentors beforehand and see what is it I'm going to get into so that there are no surprises. And sometimes when you're starting a PhD, there can be surprises. And sometimes people working with the same mentor may have totally different experiences as well. So it's really important to prepare yourself. What sort of person is this? How do the people in the research lab interact with this particular mentor as well? And how can I sometimes as a younger person going in, you do have to adapt your style sometimes. But yeah, I think I've been quite lucky as well in that aspect.
And I like the fact that you said you have to adapt your own style. That's super important. And
Yeah.
I think for anyone on the call, no matter what stage of your career, if you go to someone for mentorship, you better be willing to flex. And
Yeah.
it's their show almost.
Yeah. And I think I just want to highlight with that. So I think I was having a really tough time at one point with one particular mentor. And the thing that was the moment of light for me was I went to a time management course because I thought I need to manage my time better. And there was someone in that course who was talking about the need to manage your manager. And I was like, wow, that's a thing. And a mentor is like a manager as well. And it's all about how do you manage that relationship as well. So you do have to manage your mentor or mentor your mentor as well. So we're not always on the receiving end, but we also have to see what are the things that I need to deliver and how do I need to adapt myself to be able to maximize my learning from this person.
Absolutely. So you're at Microsoft. Microsoft is the crown jewel of the world, and to a degree, and you've risen there as a researcher, right? And can you give us some of your experiences there, especially as a woman, especially as a Black woman in the UK, right? Those are lessons that we would love to sort of draw from and understand what should we sort of expect on a global scale versus in the Caribbean. I think it's very easy for us to take the intermingling of races for granted versus that's not necessarily the case out there, and people behave differently in the professional environment.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting. I don't know if I have answers, but one thing is I think we are in a period of change as well in terms of something you've alluded to, which is diversity and inclusion. So this is something people are becoming, especially tech companies, are becoming more and more aware of, and actually putting steps forward to see how can they include, how can they be more diverse and inclusive. And we see this in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, but also in terms of things like disabilities as well. People with varying abilities or different abilities as well. And I think this is super important. So I'll talk a little bit about my journey. So I think so. I've been at Microsoft for 3.5 years, and in the time I've had a couple of promotions. And I do think that working in tech is a great environment. Working in tech research in particular is a fantastic environment. Um, I'm a big advocate for research. I don't think it's for everybody. Some people may find it boring, but so one of the interesting things of working in a place like Microsoft Research is that a lot of people fit. So I work with research engineers who are very focused on delivering things. And I work with researchers who are more blue sky thinkers. And I work with people who are more pragmatic researchers as well. So thinking of research in terms of impact. So my particular journey, when I was in Microsoft, it was the start of the healthcare team, which is now called Health Intelligence. And one of the most important things for me was looking for collaborators. So I mentioned that, mental health was something that I was really interested in. So I started looking for collaborators in the mental health space. This is one of the nice things about research in tech and research in general, research in academia as well, is that it does give you that freedom to sort of look for where are the areas you want to go into more depth or research in. So I advocate careers in research, research in machine learning for those who are interested, but it's not for everybody. And it's about discovering yourself and what are the things you like, your strengths, your weaknesses. Research does require persistence and perseverance because sometimes things don't work out. We always hear about the successes of research, but we don't hear about the failures, that sometimes things do fail. So yeah, I think for me, a big part of my success at Microsoft has been collaboration and people. And success is never in isolation. Before I was talking about mentors, for me, the most important thing of success was having good collaborators and learning to work with different types of people as well. So you don't want to just exclude some people and say, oh, I don't want to collaborate with you, but collaborate with people who you have synergy with, but also who lends perspective to your way of seeing things as well. And this comes down to being inclusive in our behaviors and that having that diverse and inclusive perspective as well. And you asked some other questions about moving from the Caribbean as a Black woman to the UK and working. So tech is a predominantly male environment. Machine learning in particular is very male dominated. I think one thing that I have valued a lot as well is, and I'm going to say it again, people
Yes.
in another aspect, which has been community. So community for me I think this is something I realized way after my PhD, how important community was. I think maybe during my PhD and my degree, I was probably very much focused on getting things done. About 4 years after my PhD, I started attending more conferences and just trying to get to know the landscape of research and the work I was doing. And there were some pivotal moments when I discovered actually there are people at these conferences and they're quite interesting as well. So I wish I discovered this a lot earlier on, maybe during my PhD would have helped. But this was just so enriching because getting into these different communities and so like the communities I'm part of, I'd say I'm part of the machine learning community. I'm also part of the Women in Machine Learning community. So I'm on the board of directors of Women in Machine Learning. I'm also part of the Trinidadians in AI, Trinbagonians in AI community as well. And these are really important communities to help you to realize that you're not alone. You're not just the isolated part of this group. There are people with similar circumstances. Sometimes you have to go more globally to find those similarities, but it's extremely enriching and it does help. It helps me in my research as well because not just I'm also brainstorming with people from these different perspectives as well, which is hugely enriching.
Nice. And it's fantastic that you've highlighted the importance of community. And one of the things we always want to highlight in this show is how we operate as folks who have been developed in a multicultural environment and what necessary advantages that we have in an environment where that doesn't necessarily exist. But I think coming from a Caribbean background, we're able to relate to people and just able to get to know people a lot easier than maybe some other people who did not live in a Caribbean environment. What would you say were maybe some of your, call it an advantage, right, that you had, be it connections, be it, I've had incredible sort of success because of Caribbean connections that I've made. I just hear the accent and I'll just randomly walk up and talk to someone. And that led into a whole new thing. And if I wasn't keen on paying attention to that, yeah.
I 100% agree with you, Mark. And I think you sort of hit the nail of the head and on the head. And I think this is something I really want to emphasize, that growing up in the Caribbean, I feel really, really blessed. I think that it's a huge lesson, and we can contribute a lot to the world. Um, I think this is something I didn't appreciate until maybe 10 years after I lived in the UK. Because maybe my attitude has changed a lot. And I think that the fact that I was able to adapt so quickly, I think that's part of my cultural roots. That in in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago in particular, we are very multicultural. We are very diverse. We're encouraged to celebrate different peoples, different religions. You think everybody has their holiday. I mean, that's quite amazing that in going to an all-girls Catholic school, I celebrated everything. I celebrated Eid, Diwali, all of the holidays I celebrated, and you learn about the different cultures, and you celebrate the cultures as well. And I think this is hugely enriching. I think one thing I've also come to appreciate, I think this year during the carnival season, being in Trinidad, and also during the pandemic as well, that I've hugely admired. And it was like a moment of revelation for me, was the fact that in the Caribbean and in Trinidad and Tobago, especially, I'd say we really know how to pivot and adapt ourselves very quickly. So for me, the creativity in a moment of pandemic has been amazing to see. All of the calypso events that are going on, the sort of lyrics, the musical and lyrical intelligence. It's amazing. It's incredible how people do things safely. So in terms of managing the pandemic is managed, but at the same time, people are expressing themselves. So as a Caribbean people, we're very expressive. I think another thing, the Prime Minister of Barbados as well. She was giving a speech a few months ago, and one of the things she was saying is that in the Caribbean, we really have a seedbed for talent in AI, and we can be protagonists, and we have to be protagonists in AI and developing tech, because if AI and tech is only developed for people in the big economies, then we are going to not be protagonists of things that will affect us in the future. So this, I think, is really important. I think it's important, the sort of initiatives that you have to get more people from the Caribbean into the tech space to be the ones who are making the decisions around design of how technology and artificial intelligence is designed. So we don't just be consumers, but we're also contributing to that landscape as well. So I think this is hugely important.
And that's a super important point in terms of these systems will control a lot of decisions that are made. So we definitely want to have a voice there as well, and say, hey, is it making the right decision, type thing. And you've achieved a great deal in your career so far, right? When you look at your LinkedIn, it's formidable, right? Especially if I was in high school or undergrad, I'll be like, wow, I'm actually really happy to meet you now, more formally as a colleague. And you're principal research manager, right? That's quite high title, especially in research. That's incredible. What is it that continues to motivate you to push yourself?
So I would say, I was talking about this the other day. I think these things come with time and patience and perseverance. So these are three key things that I'd encourage people to do. Not to give up on yourself, be ambitious, and dream. And I think this is something that we have as a Caribbean people as well. I was talking about at the age of 15 already, that the teachers were fostering us to sort of dream, what do you want to be in the future? So have those dreams, have those ambitions, and work towards them. We can, and also think of your failures as successes as well, because sometimes our failures are moments of pivoting. Sometimes they're moments when we persevere and push through and continue, but sometimes they're going to be moments when we pivot. And we think it's Carnival Tuesday here, and this is what we're seeing with Carnival, that people are pivoting as well. I think we have a lot to learn from the creative cultural space of the Caribbean as well. And this is something we can take to wherever we want to go.
Great. And one of my stories that I don't know if anyone else might hear it after this, but I wanted to go to Microsoft. So after I hate school. Like I legitimately don't like school, but that's something you have to do in order to get access to the US, right? To live and stuff like that. So I had a great advisor. I was very fortunate because of my Caribbean roots. So I was talking to people, got to know him, and he's like, listen, come and do machine learning. You're wasting time doing this degree that you're studying. And he's teaching in the class. I'm like, whoa, okay, cool. And so I had this interview at Microsoft after my after my master's, and I failed. Right, my friend told me I was going to get an offer. Nothing happened, and I had to make this decision to hop into a PhD. And in my interview in Microsoft, the guy was like, "Hey, that happened to me too. I went and got a degree, came back 5 years later. That actually happened to me. I came back to Microsoft 5 years later, didn't make it again. So I'm with you on the perseverance, right? That's a great thing that I wanted to highlight, and it's okay, and you just keep pushing, and those things led to many other great things in my life. So thanks for calling that out.
Yeah, and I think, this is a great example that when you keep knocking on doors, they do open. Sometimes you have to knock on 100 doors. Mm-hmm. So literally, I remember when I was doing my undergrad, one of the things, everybody was getting internships. I literally sent 100 applications and got 0 job offers. And that made me go to the career advisor, and he said, your CV is rubbish. But that was a pivotal point as well. So learning from the failures as well, I think, is super important. And sometimes we need to talk about our failures a bit more, to encourage people to push on and push ahead and not give up.
But as a researcher, I think that is the true muscle that a researcher has, right? It's this ability to hit this, spend so much time, invest so much, it turns out into nothing, and then say, okay, what are we going to do now? That's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's a lesson in failure.
Especially the publishing process. That's just brutal. I think it took me like 4 years to publish one paper. It was
same.
Rough. And okay, so what's on the roadmap for this year?
Interesting question. So I think this year, hopefully we come out of the pandemic. So I think for me, I didn't know. I think one thing the pandemic has taught me a lot is the importance of balance, and also the importance of fostering this community. So one thing that's become really important for me during this time is, okay, I prioritize work, and I think it's really important that we do good work, but also you have to prioritize your family. So now I'm in a position where I can spend more time with my parents, and this has made me reevaluate some of my priorities as well. And also making sure that you stay connected with friends. So this has been a challenge during these times of lockdowns and social distancing. But finding ways to engage with community has been really important. So I hope that, as we come out of this pandemic, hopefully this year, that's on the horizon for me. I see it as a real opportunity to reflect during this time and think, well, how am I getting that balance so that work doesn't dominate, but that I do have this balance between work, family, friends. And getting that right, I think, is on the horizon for me. I think, the other thing, I want to do great research. That is always on the horizon. I want to solve the problems of machine learning for healthcare. But this is more of a 10-year panorama, I think. If we really want to have things that are impactful and actionable, this is something that would take time. But I'm hoping that there are some clear milestones that I want to achieve this year.
So it sounds like you're still dreaming, even though you're a principal research manager.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. The dreams don't stop.
Quick question around how many papers you read a day. What would you advise folks?
Oh my gosh, this is where my imposter syndrome comes in. So my dream is to read a paper a week.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Give me like a month.
Yeah, that is my dream. That is what I dream about. So
Hmm.
maybe on the horizon, that's my ambition. Yeah, I think it is really important to read papers. I would say we need to read more. Um, I guess the problem that I have is that as you get more into the trenches of research, sometimes it's harder to do that. But reading is important to have that type of reflection. Um, so there's some things I have to do proactively in order to get that reading time. So I have two journal clubs that I participate in. And this is a way of reading by osmosis. So somebody presents, and I think this is a good way of prioritizing reading as researchers or as people working in machine learning as well. One way to prioritize reading is also to rely on others as well to read and tell you the highlights of research.
I need some more friends who are researchers. Fantastic. So can you give us two career tips for a high schooler, a college person, and someone at the top of their profession?
Oh wow. Okay, I should have thought of this before. So I think yeah, I'll just reiterate a couple of the themes. So I think for a high schooler, dream, have ambitions, foster ambitions, um, meet people, network with people, see what sort of jobs are there on LinkedIn, what are the sort of things that you'd want to do, and sometimes this can give you ideas of where you want to be as well. For a university student, was that the second one?
Yeah.
Cool. University students, I think, uh, there are two dimensions. One is don't waste your time, study really hard. I would say work hard and play hard. So studies are really important, but also one thing that's really important is fostering those networks. So these are people in university very often. Those are people that you will be in connection with 20 years down the line as well. So this is your crew. So make sure that you foster those relationships as well. Because also it's about enriching your own life as well, learning from people from different backgrounds. So university is very often a time when you meet people from different backgrounds as well. So take advantage of that. And for someone advanced in their career, I would say, uh, yeah, um, hmm, I think, yeah, always pay it forward. When you become more advanced in your career, think, how am I going to help to shape the landscape of my fields, whether it's artificial intelligence, tech, or whatever fields we're in. When we get more advanced, we're there for a reason. And we've got there in a certain way. So how do we pay it forward? And also how do we create a community that is rich and diverse and inclusive as well?
Wow. I'm gathering everything there. And one of the things I wanted to raise, especially, is foster your relationships in high school, because those folks who go off and do certain things, and some of my crazy, job turn points have come from folks in high school and just meeting people, networking. So really happy that you sort of call that out. Last two questions. What are three principles you live by?
Yeah, so I did think of this question before, but so I think it's important for anybody to think of their principles and think of their hierarchy of values. So I'll share like the things that I really value. So I think one is transparency, honesty, truthfulness. I think this is super important for me in the workplace and also in my out of workplace relationships as well. That I am transparent and that's something I really value as well. I think the other thing is kindness. So, being kind, I think, is really important. Life is too short. You never know what another person is going through. So it always pays off to be kind. I think related to being kind, always, always sort of having the assumption of best intent of others. So give people a lot of grace to make mistakes. sometimes we have a tendency as humans to hold on to grudges, to hold on to things of the past, but sometimes we do need to. Sometimes we need to use that to stimulate change, but sometimes we need to let.
Great. And 3 books that you recommend.
Okay, this one I did think about.
I'm going to ask 2 questions though. I'm gonna throw a little curveball. There's 3 books in general, sometimes about life and career and all that, but then give me 1 book on stats because I've seen you're a professional statistician, so I want to step my game up.
Yeah. So 3 books. I think my number 1 book, which I read at least once a year, is, besides Pride and Prejudice, which I read once a year, is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Highly recommended. So this is a book written in 1936, so 1930s, but it's really amazing to see those universal principles. So that's a book that's taught me a lot. And also it's made me a lot happier as well, I think, sort of applying some of those principles as well. So that for me is a key text. Dostoevsky, The Idiot. This for me is a great book. Maybe I read once every 2 to 3 years. But I think there is really interesting seeing 2 things out of this book was the art of conversation, 3 things. The art of conversation, the understanding Dostoevsky has of the human psyche, I think it's really amazing. So you see this both in The Idiot and also in Crime and Punishment as well, where he has this deep understanding of the human psyche. But also the 3rd thing from that book and Crime and Punishment as well is it's just really amazing seeing how non-judgmental the protagonists are, where you see people who maybe in society at large you'd shun, but there's a lot of non-judgment about people, that everybody has their history and their story, and we can't judge people. Right, now the 3rd book, I would say, so I love the classics. So I would say Charles Dickens, Our Mutual Friend. And I think that from these sorts of classics, it was a time when people had could think a lot about human psychology. And I think Charles Dickens really has this thinking about how human psychology is. And we need human psychology in order to live. We are social beings, and these are things are important. So stats books, I'd say I'm biased towards my PhD, one of my PhD advisors.
Okay.
He has the book Chris Bishop, so the book Pattern Recognition and Machine Learning. So
that was your advisor?
Yeah, that was my advisor.
Oh, that's insane.
So yeah, now he's my boss's boss. So yeah, I think this is a very well-written book at the intersection of really solid statistical principles to machine learning. I must say my go-to statistics book is my A-level statistics book. So I still have it on my shelf 20 years later. This for me is a go-to text because if I want to look up any distribution, it's there. It's amazing. So yeah.
Great. And that's super cool that your advisors, which I have his book right there. And
yeah,
that's a heavy, serious book. So for anyone doing machine learning, yeah, I guess if you don't have Bishop's book on your shelf, just hanging out, maybe you're not in machine learning. And thank you very much for your time. I've appreciated your insights and enjoyed the conversation. And hopefully the folks listening have gotten a lot of inspiration to pursue a research career and, continue doing great things.
Okay, thanks, Mark. That's really great speaking to you and hope that was useful.
All right, thanks for listening to today's interview, and I hope you take away some great perspectives for your own journey in machine learning and tech. Remember that your Caribbean heritage is a great asset for your professional career, so take advantage of it and keep working on your skills. Later.